Hello, and welcome to Sobercast, where we provide AA speaker meetings and workshops in podcast format. We're an ad-free podcast, and if you enjoy listening, please help us be self-supporting by visiting sobercast.com, look for the donate link, and drop $1 or $2 into our virtual basket. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. My name is Jim. I'm an alcoholic, and I'm a satisfied customer of Alcoholics Anonymous. Very happy to be sober. I got sober on August 8th of 1980. I was 17 years old, and I never found it necessary to go back out and prove what I already knew, and that was that I was an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. So I'm very pleased to be here today. And it's been a wonderful conference, and I want to thank the YPAA committee for asking me to come on out here, and God saw fit to make things happen in my life that made it easy to be here. So thanks again, really. And a lot of this wouldn't be possible because mainstream AA doesn't really look too well upon books that aren't published by AA. Fortunately, the young people in AA will have an open mind that some of the older people don't. So I'm grateful to be here. And it started with my friend Jay back there, who invited me to the first YPAA in Stockholm in 2010 to present on this, just like I am doing today. And again at Dublin. And I hope I get to see all of you at Copenhagen for the third YPAA. It's really worth the trip. It really is. So thanks again. So, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous about 3 weeks before I went away to college. And one of the books that was handed to me was the Big Book. And most of you are familiar. I'm actually gratified to hear that the Big Book is referenced so many times in this conference. But one of my favorite lines is in the book, and it's on page 95, and it's with working with others. And it talks a lot about what this program is really all about. So if he is sincerely interested and wants to see you again, ask him to read this book in the interval. After doing that, he must decide for himself whether he wants to go on. He should not be pushed or prodded by you, his wife, or his friends. If he is to find God, the desire must come from within. It's kind of interesting that they say the desire to find God must come from within, not to find sobriety. And it really underscores something that I truly believe, and that is AA is a program to help alcoholics find God, sobriety results. And over and over, when I look at this program in that way, it changes the way I do things. And ultimately, instead of treating the symptoms, I get to treat the underlying problem. And the underlying problem is mirrored in how we named our fourth chapter in our book, We Agnostics. And that's one of the questions that I put forth to the people I sponsor. When we come to step 2, I say to them, why did they name that chapter We Agnostics? Obviously, people come to AA with the idea of God, but there it is, We Agnostics. You really can't get around it. And what it really means is that alcoholics do their very best to live apart from God, whether they believe in God or not. And what we do in AA is we establish that relationship with God through having a spiritual awakening through the 12 steps. And, the 12 steps in the Big Book were, developed after 4 years of Bill's sobriety. And what did they do over that 4-year period before the Big Book was written? What they did was they read a lot of other books. And one of the other books that they read was the Sermon on the Mount, written by Emmet Fox. And the Sermon on the Mount was written and published in 1934, which coincidentally is the year that Bill got sober on December 11th. And it was a book that was given to newcomers throughout AA in both Akron and in New York in the early days leading up to the publishing of our basic text from which our society takes its name. And, there was a happy coincidence that took place. What happened was Bill ended up sponsoring a guy named Al Steckman. And Al Steckman was the daughter of Emmett Fox's, the son of Emmett Fox's secretary. And So it was through this connection that Bill and the early AAs in New York started going to hear Emmet Fox speak at some of the largest venues in New York City, the Hippodrome, Madison Square Garden, Carnegie Hall, and he used to pack him in because he had a real message. And the message is that if you were to practice the discipline of the mind and change the thinking, God can be in your life and make real changes. One of the things that was pasted on Facebook this morning, and I'm a member of a Facebook group that goes through a book called Around the Year with Emmet Fox, the comment this morning was talking about believing the untrue. And we're all sitting in this room because we have believed in the untrue. We've believed in the false over and over again. We've believed that we could pick up a drink with impunity, and all of us found out one way or another that we can't possibly do that. When we came to Alcoholics Anonymous, we had to come to the idea that we can't pick up a drink with impunity, that we're bodily and mentally different than our fellows. But the rest of our lives are very much the same. Just like it talks about setting aside prejudice in Chapter 4 of our book, where we talk about Step 2, we have to set aside prejudice against some of the ideas about God that we might have had. We might have to get rid of some of our old ideas. And most of our old ideas have centered around thinking that, life sucks, it's unfair, people are awful and try to take advantage of you, the next shoe is going to drop, people die in threes, all this negative crap that we have embraced over and over again. And the funny thing is, it's untrue. But our beliefs are what's important to us. It shapes how we interact with everybody around us. I like to tell a story about Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus sailed over here in 1492, and what did people believe in 1492? They believed that the world was flat. And over the course of that journey, there was many attempts at mutiny, because the people who were sailing with Christopher Columbus believed deep in their heart that they would sail over the edge of the earth and be eaten by serpents. Now, all of us know today that the world is round, and that's not possible. However, they believed in the false, and that was their reality. Over and over again, I've had to peel back what I have found to be false to get to the reality. And the reality is that I can't live apart from God and have happy, contented sobriety. And that's the message that's grown through the connection between Emmet Fox, the Sermon on the Mount, and the Big Book. So, just to go into a little bit of the history, and before I go on further, to my left, there's a flyer for a retreat in Vermont that I'll be leading in March, where I go into this in depth over the course of a weekend. There's also a reprint of an article by a guy named Igor S. from Connecticut, who wrote about Emmet Fox that was published in the Grapevine. There's also my card if you wanted to join the Yahoo group that covers all this stuff and have access to all the material that I've printed over the years. But Emmet Fox was born in Ireland in 1886, and Bill Wilson was born 9 years later. And, Emmet Fox was born to a man who was a physician, who was a member of the English Parliament. His parents were devout Catholics, and it took a lot for Emmet Fox to turn his back on his parents' faith, because he understood deep down that he could have a personal relationship with God. Emmet Fox attended a meeting in 1914 where the International New Thought Alliance was organized. And why that's important is that deep down, Alcoholics Anonymous is part of the New Thought. When you take a look through the book, and it talks about the terms describing God as universal mind, things of that nature, that wasn't the way God was referred to until the New Thought movement really came into its own. 1931, Emmet Fox emigrated to the United States and became the minister of the Church of the Healing Christ in New York City. And, it was from that platform that he started giving talks that challenged everybody to think differently about their lives. In August of 1934, the Sermon on the Mount was published. And, as a newcomer, I was handed that book 31 years ago. Told that, there's a companion to the Big Book that I could learn an awful lot about the spiritual experience. And, when we talk about the spiritual experience, and some people say, well, it's the spiritual part. It's like saying it's the wet part of the ocean. The spiritual experience is what this is all about. It shapes the way that we interact with everybody around us. So in 1936, Bob Steckman starts to work with Bill to get sober. And Bill and the rest of the gang start going to Emmett Fox's lectures. And those were some of the ideas that came about in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's funny, we think that we kind of, invented a lot of this stuff, and what we've done is we've begged, borrowed, and stolen from everybody around us, packaged everything into a way that alcoholics can digest, but they are universal principles that we get to see all over the place. So one of the things that we talk about a lot in our program is those wonderful promises that we find. But you know what? The idea of promises wasn't really invented by us. There's some promises on page 130 of the Sermon on the Mount. And just think about these things when I read them off. As soon as you obtain the spiritual consciousness, you will find that all things indeed work together for good, that those who love good or God. You will experience perfect health, abundant prosperity, complete and utter happiness. Your health will be so good that mere living will in itself be inexpressible joy. The body, no longer the burden to be dragged about that so many people find it, will be as though it were shod with winged shoes. Your prosperity will be such that you need not take the question of finance into consideration at all. Does that remind anybody of a certain promise in the Big Book? You will always have all the supply you'll need to carry out any of your plans. The world will turn out to be full of charming people, all too anxious to help you in every way. Others will come into your life only for good. You will find yourself occupied with the most delightful and interesting activities of the most widely useful kind. All your energy and all your faculties will find full scope for their expression, and in short, you will develop the completely integrated and fully expressed personality of which modern psychology dreams. Does anybody want to sign up for any of that? Put your hands up. Let's see it. Come on. We have a nice enthusiastic crowd here, and I really appreciate it. Another book that Emmet Fox is quoted in is a book about his life story, and it's written by the woman who succeeded him as the rector of that church. And he gave these points to live by. So listen to these and think of, how, if they apply or you've heard these somewhere else before. So Emmet Fox gave these following points to live by. Look for the best in each person and situation. Live in the present and let go of the past. Forgive without exception, including yourself. Work to the very best of your ability. Work at having a healthy body and harmonious surroundings. Be of service to others without interfering. Share the knowledge of truth with others. Refrain from criticism and gossip. Pray and meditate 15 minutes daily. Claim spiritual understanding for yourself. Give your first thought in the morning to God. Speak a positive word for the world daily. Know that life can be changed for the better by understanding scientific prayer, which is the lifting of your consciousness. Even in our basic text, they tell us, upon awakening, we need to plug into this power right away if we're going to expect to really take full advantage of what AA has to offer. And, I didn't do this from day one. I have to be honest. For the first couple of years I was sober, I lived my life as if I was being shot out of a cannon every morning. I got up at the very last possible moment with the last dime in my pocket, the last ounce of gas in my car, and I would race down the shoulder of the road and give everybody the finger while I was driving down the road trying to get to work on time. I would get to work late. The boss would be pissed off. I'd have to borrow money for lunch. It's not a way to really embrace serenity from the very beginning of the day. My sponsor, another man who really embraced this book, turned around and said, Jim, why don't you try getting up 15 minutes earlier? Why don't you try filling up your car when it gets down to a quarter of a tank instead of how far below E you can go? Why don't you try not spending every dime on Friday night chasing after girls? And I started to do those things. I started to show up on time or early for work. The boss got off my back. I wasn't harried all the time. And then my sponsor says, when you're driving down the Long Island Expressway, going to work, why don't you try turning the radio off for 10 miles? So anybody could do that. So, I turn the radio off, I wait for 10 miles to pass by, turn WBAB back on, and missing the whole idea that I might consider my plans for the day. What am I going to be up against? All these little things add up to having a serene existence in sobriety. And I am able to face life without having this craziness that goes on. And it's because of the principles that I found in the Sermon on the Mount and the Big Book. Today I have a very high-pressure job. I run the third largest shopping mall in the United States. I manage to do a very little staff. I also have 5 other facility managers reporting to me. I work on the World Trade Center redevelopment. I sponsor a gaggle of people. I have a full life, and I get to the office early. I post a Big Book study on the internet, which I get to correspond with over 5,000 people each day. And I get right. I field some phone calls from sponsees. At 8:30, when the phone starts ringing, the first words out of my mouth aren't, oh shit, it's, how can I be of service? It's a stark contrast to the guy who came to Alcoholics Anonymous because of these principles. Because I stopped believing in the false. And what do I believe in today? I get to believe all those wonderful promises that I just read out from page 130. I get to be of service. I changed my mind about what I do for a living. Look, I didn't set out to be the manager of operations for a mall. That wasn't what I thought to be this wonderful, fulfilling existence. However, it makes this possible. It makes it possible for me to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. It gives me the wherewithal to be here today and to support all the service I get to do. And ultimately, the most important thing that I do each day is carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, what's nice about the way we have this structured, and unlike most of the other workshops that we've had here over this weekend, is that there's an opportunity for any or all of you to ask me a question, to make a comment, to share something. Because ultimately this is something that you don't get to hear about every day. And it's important that we avail ourselves of all the spiritual avenues that are available to us. I will not fence myself in with books that are conference approved, because there's a lot more out there, and even our basic text tells us that, we should look at other books wherever possible. And, this is one of the books. Another book I have found very important to me is The Spirituality of Imperfection. It changed the way I looked at other people, instead of demanding perfection from every one of them, which is a losing game. I'm able to cut everybody some slack today. People don't need to hear about how I think they should lead their lives. However, if they do ask me, I can offer something in the way of experience and not an opinion. So if any of you are willing to join us at the Wilson House on March 24th and 25th in East Dorset, Vermont, it's an experience just to go there too. I'm grateful that they asked me to run a retreat at least once or twice a year there, because it is a living memorial to one of our co-founders and a real spiritual place. And I'm grateful for all these wonderful opportunities for sharing this wonderful message. Thank you. I did that with getting all teared up. Jay's heard me speak before. I usually get all emotional and stuff. So, does anybody have any questions about the things that Emmett Fox teaches or the Sermon on the Mount? Yes? Can you talk about his philosophy of the Lord's Prayer and the Golden Key? Okay, let's talk about the Golden Key. Actually, it's a nice little pamphlet that I hand out to my sponsees, and roots of it can be found in AA too. Basically what the Golden Key is telling us is that to stop thinking about our problem and think about God instead. Because what most of us do is we have a problem in our lives, and then the squirrel cage goes inside of our head, and we think about 7,000 different ways we can approach it and fix it, instead of understanding that the real power is God. And the idea also is that the more thought that you give to your problem, the more power that you give to it. And ultimately, you want to get rid of that thought, that problem as soon as possible. So if we want to turn that over to God, we should do so without looking over our shoulder. And that's ultimately what the Golden Key says. The Ten Commandments, which we require a long, lengthy answer, but the long and short of it is, the Ten Commandments establish what our relationship is with God. With the first, with all of it, where it talks about we are His children, ultimately. And any real parent would take care of their children. And it's understanding, how we interact with our fellow man. Anybody else? Yes. Hi, Trey.
The 7-day mental diet suggested manual time to do it. And I've tried, and I can't get through the stumbling block of having this belief system that is impossible. And I can't make it share and have it. Big uses of
My experience is that I've had to suspend disbelief. The question is that he approaches the 7-day mental diet with the idea that it's impossible, that he can't possibly get through it. And with any of our endeavors, whatever it happens to be, we have to suspend the idea of disbelief that we can't possibly do it. Most of us came to AA thinking we couldn't possibly be sober, and yet look at us now. Because we suspended disbelief, we gave the possibility of it being successful. Anything that I've gone into where I said it can't possibly happen, it does not. However, if I go into it with the idea that I could possibly be successful at it, it can happen. So I have to take myself out of the equation. Yes?
One of the issues that I have with reading to do with looking at things simple and presenting, like you said, in a way that I can't argue with it. It's like so obviously true. Sometimes with me, with outside readings, I have trouble with the idea that it's a writing of scripture and it's interpreted in so many different ways by different groups. For instance, the Bible. I've never read Sermon on the Mount, and I'd really like to, but I just have trouble sometimes because I don't know how to approach the determining validity of the interpretation of his writing. So I'm wondering how you've done that over the years, coming to an understanding of, your way of determining validity of scripture's writing, spiritual approaches.
When I talk about the Sermon on the Mount, one of the things that I've done over the years is I've created a glossary and references guide for the Sermon on the Mount. And mainly because the book was written quite a while ago by a man who grew up in the United Kingdom. And there's a lot of references and terms that people don't understand. I don't have copies of that with me, but if you go to Yahoo and you type in Sermon on the Mount with underscores between the words, it'll bring you to a Yahoo group where that exists. Or you can send me an email. My card's over here. But it helps to, get some ideas about it. There's been many, many different interpretations of the Sermon on the Mount. Oswald Chambers did one too, and he was widely read by the people in Akron. You need to find something that works for you, ultimately. What really works for me with Emmet Fox is he took the whole, the glorification of Christ out of the picture and talks about the philosophy that underlies it. To me, that makes all the sense in the world, and I've embraced it. Everybody in this room has a little bit different perspective on how they approach all of it. But with any endeavor, trying to go in with as an open mind as possible is going to be the best thing you could possibly do. Thanks. You had your hand up over here, right?
Hi, my name's Julie, and I'm not
Joanne.
My sponsor had me studying this since 1993, that particular book. And there's a couple points when I made. One was, I don't know if anybody knows this, is that a mental diet. Mental diet is to go 7 days without a negative thought. And as soon as I heard that, the first time, oh my God. There goes, whatever they want. Sometimes you just start over. You'll start over. And you'll get an hour. And you'll get 3 hours. And you'll get a day. And that's been my experience. The other point is, it even says in the beginning, the preface of this book, that this is a text to be studied, and that there was no way I could understand any of this without the help of the group that my sponsor had to sit in with her and 3 and 4 other people every week, and we read paragraph by paragraph, what does this mean? Then when she stopped doing it, I started in my home, and we had a friend of ours go on eBay and order a 2-volume, 2-inch big dictionary from 1935. And when we couldn't understand a word, we looked it up of that time and that age, that day and age. And it's been incredibly helpful.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And that's how I started the retreats that I do, is that I would take small groups of people through this book over the course of about 13 weeks, usually 8 or 10 people, and we go through the whole book together. It's no different than the big book. It's a textbook, and you get so much out of studying it together. And it's just taking the time out and bringing people who are like-minded together. Thanks. That was fantastic. Yes?
True. I think there's some similar statement like Emmett Fox was the godfather of modern-day metaphysical teaching. That's my first question. My second one is, he was founded all on this book. How would you start thinking?
Emmett Fox has been called a lot of things, and I think that's one of the terms that he's been called the father of modern metaphysical thinking, teaching. And the power through constructive thinking really introduces the real discipline of the mind, in that he talks about it in another pamphlet too. It's called Building the Mental Equivalent of Your Life. So just as much as you go to an architect and say, I want to build a 5-bedroom ranch with three bathrooms, and it's going to be set on a hillside. That man has in his mind the picture of what that's going to look like. And he takes the time to draw up the plans of how that is going to be built by a general contractor or builder. But it all starts out with that mental idea of what that is. And we need to build the mental equivalent of our lives in our minds first before we can enjoy it on this plane. They talk about the 4th dimension of experience. And that's what it's all about, is you do the work in the 4th dimension, and on the 3rd you get to see the results. So you can really tell how spiritual somebody is by what their life looks like, because it's from within, is expressed outward. Thanks for that question. Yes? Hi, John.
I like how Emmet Fox says, don't take my word for it, try it. Very practical, like, you don't have to do what I'm saying to try it. Of course, it's in passion, give this thing a chance. My experience at work. And I just had one question though. Is there a difference between, he uses scientific treatment, treatment word. Is there a difference between the two, or is it very using interchangeable? It's just something I
it's more or less interchangeable. The treatment is to pray scientifically, which is to turn it over to God and let it go. And then further treatment is to not look over the shoulder and watch how well God is doing with solving your problem, but knowing that it will be taken care of. Believing deep in your heart that whatever the solution will be taken care of. And avoiding the idea that we can outline what the solution is. I've had the dubious honor of being laid off about a dozen times in sobriety. And, early on, I would say to myself, it's this job with this company, and if I don't get it, then But, after a while, I would say in my prayers, God, you will take care of my lack, and you will see fit what's the best way to do so. And then all kinds of wonderful things started coming into my life when I stopped limiting God. So that's really the essence of the treatment is don't limit God. Don't predict what the outcome happens to be. Know that you will be taken care of as God's child. Thanks. Yes.
Rob Alcoholics.
Hi, Rob.
Can you share a little bit about your knowledge and experience with Fox scientific or something like this?
Over physical illness. Yeah, the question is, what is your experience with Emmet Fox's using scientific prayer to overcome physical illness? And, in the broader strokes, we know of people who hold on to anger, resentment, and fear, and it gets expressed in their lives physically. And over again, I've seen people turn around from that kind of a state where it gets expressed in their physical body. When they've changed the mentality on the physical plane, everything changed. Emmet Fox actually grew up as a sickly child, and he overcame his own physical handicaps by changing his thought about life and what his position was with God and his fellow man. But also Emmet Fox would often say that doctors can be the best help of all. That we have real treatments for things, and we shouldn't shy away from them. Hope that answers your question. Don't tell me you're all talked out. Yep. Yes. Hi.
I have one more comment about that kind of thought. In our study, someone had brought up, well, if you can have that great health, then why can't we drink again? And be warned, Emmett Fox is talking and teaching to the general public,
Right.
not to the alcoholic. So we have to always keep that in mind, and that's why I'm sure the big book is more for us than Emmett Fox for everyone else. But one of the points that I always redirect people at is, well, one of the principles he talks about is that you manifest where you're at spiritually. And for instance, Jesus could walk on water. He's Jesus. He loved it. In his relationship with his higher power. And when I can walk to Molokai and back, from Hawaii to Maui, right? When I can walk the water, then I'll drink again. That's kind of where I'm at spiritually.
That's a great comment, and I've had that question posed to me by some of my sponsees because they fall back into that disbelief, The funny thing is the problem has been removed. I wouldn't drink whether I could or not anyway because it holds no, promise for me whatsoever. And to me, that's the miracle. So it's kind of a hollow question of, let me try to skewer the teacher whenever they come up with that. It's another hand here, yes.
Well, that's funny. I could not drink even if I would, even if it was an option. It's just not valid, And that's the truth that was brought into my life through Emmett Fox and 12 steps. It's mainly working on basically the practice of the presence of God. In the term, it's not treating my outside, but treating my ideas of the outside. Because the ideas of the outside is what's killing me. Because the person doesn't kill me, the idea of the person. So, in a sense, I don't know if you got the same experience, but you see the idea of someone being sick, and instead of seeing them as a sickly person, seeing them as a beautiful child of God, living an everlasting experience, you utterly change that. You have the same kind of experience when it comes to the healing or the practice of the presence of God.
Absolutely, and let me relate a story about that. The biggest pain in the ass tenant we have in that mall is Nordstrom. They're very high maintenance, difficult. When I got to working at Garden State Plaza, my boss would basically like hide in his office when this woman named Serene came down to complain about stuff. So, I met with her, and I was supposed to do a large construction project right outside their front door, and it was going to go on for weeks. And, I talked to her, and I told her what I would do and give her information, what have you. And the project went well, but it went over by about a week, and we had to do some water main work. I mean, it wasn't that big a deal, but she demanded to have a meeting with me. And I said, sure, come on down. And I invited my boss, who decided to take the day off instead. And I sat down with her and a couple of her cronies, and she starts doing this, you could have done this, and this went on too long, and you took more parking spaces than you said. And the little part of me wanted to say, well, I've run a hell of a lot more construction work than you've ever seen, so buzz off. But the concept of resist not evil came into play. And I said to her, you're right. I could have done better. I apologize. And she was spoiling for a fight. She wanted me to look bad in front of her superiors. And when I said that, it took everything off the table. And why? Because I didn't find it necessary to defend my ego, and I didn't need to get into the ditch with her by exercising that idea of resist not evil. Because the only strength that evil has against me is the power that I give it to it. And so it changed everything. And she didn't clap after that. You had your hand up.
Oh, yeah, I was wondering, how old was Emmett Fox when he died?
I'm sorry?
How old was he when he died?
Let's see, he died in 1951, and so that he was 65 years old. Yes?
You got that picture of him?
Somebody mistaked me for Emmet Fox in Ireland when I ran a retreat over there in October. We got a good laugh out of that.
I had a question. I know, fortunately, I'm obsessed with his work when I think it's over, right? But I think every single piece of work you do on the lecture. 2 lines out of the big book, one of the back book stories of the last page is talking about the guy who's in the middle of them, he could not or would not see our way of life and kill himself. And how it works, those who do not or cannot or will not. And actually, I don't know if he literally took that from Emmett Fox. I believe he did, because I've seen it several times. That idea when he's talking about human will, that they can't, some can't get sober, some just cannot grasp, and some will not. Is there any other direct quotes that maybe Wilson stole from Emmett Fox's literature?
The one that really stands out is the term spiritual awakening, which before Emmet Fox wrote the Sermon on the Mount was virtually unknown, and yet it appears in both places. And there's several others, which I could probably go into, but you should come to the retreat and you get the whole thing.
Yeah, and I assume Bill just kind of used his own word.
Yeah, he was the master at adopting ideas and putting them into language that we can understand and could accept. That's great. Do it. Thank you. Yes?
Okay, I have 2 questions.
Uh-oh.
The Beatitudes, how do they parallel principles?
I think that the Beatitudes had a lot to do with how our principles came to be developed. And if you read the front end of the Sermon on the Mount, it really talks about this stuff too. And also, some of the ideas presented in the Beatitudes, Emmet Fox expounds on to really give you the inner meaning of what they are, and that's one thing that I really enjoy when I'm reading it. Your follow-up question is?
Because my sponsor was recommended, and my sponsor liked to do Sermon on the Mount, and I liked it. I got to listen to it. Yeah, it's hard for people for myself that grew up in a very punchy religion, like Catholic religion and stuff like that. And so my question is because a lot of the stuff in AA awards are screaming about Sermon on the Mount, how is spiritual program, but really how is it not like a religious program? How are we thinking based on the Bible? And how do you open-minded enough to get past that? Because I would love to do Sermon on the Mount, but as soon as I realized what the whole Jesus thing, I
The way I got around that personally was changing my idea of, Jesus to correspond with what Emmet Fox talks about. And he doesn't, spend all the time, glorifying, Christ, the Son of God, blah, blah. He talks specifically about the philosophy that Christ represented, the lessons that he taught. And then Emmet Fox also talks about the fact that you can find these same ideas in all the major religions. I mean, he references Hinduism, Buddhism, and many other religions. And these are all universal ideas. It just so happens that Emmet Fox was part of the New Thought movement and a branch of Christianity. But what I need to do is get rid of the prejudice I have against that so I can accept the valuable ideas that are put forth in the book. So, thanks. That was a good question. Yes. Yes, you.
Summarize or go over any of this stuff or discuss any of this stuff?
I wish I could cover this material in such a short period of time. The shortest period of time I'm able to go through all this is really about 6 or 7 hours. I'll be doing a 3-hour thing in Stockholm at the end of April. But to really summarize about all this, it is changing the way we think. Ultimately, how we think about God, about our relationship with God, our relationship with other people, the necessity to clear our channel between me and him, to look at other people in a different way than we always have, really to set aside those old ideas that have handicapped us, and to adopt a new attitude towards our fellow man. It's funny, when I started reading this book, I stopped telling people how to live their lives. And I spent a lot of time doing that. I really did. And all that did was push everybody away. And instead, I let my example, my demonstration of a word that shows up in the big book many times, speak about what I believe, and then people come to me and ask me about it. And that's really the message of this book. You can't cast your pearls before swine. You can't tell people this wonderful thing that you found. You can show them. And by that attractive example, you get to bring people close to you that want it to. So I'm sorry that we don't go more in depth into it, but anybody who hasn't read this book, pick it up. Use a highlighter. Get a pen. And join with other people to read it. So, thank you. Jay.
Yeah, Holly, for doing this. And it's been so inspiring to me to see young people all over embracing the same text and the same literature that Bill and Dr. Bob used to formulate our basic text. I just had 2 comments, really. One, I really appreciate what you said, because I was sitting here going, I wonder how many people here do. And if people wouldn't mind, I would ask anybody that's read this book if you could raise your hand. And if you have any questions, this is a book that's so great to talk about in small groups, 2, 3, 4 people. So here's a bunch of people that raise their hands, and we don't have coffee. I hope you do that. The other question here, man, when I got this book, I hated it. My Lord, does it say so many words for my upbringing against Christianity that just made me want to vomit? And I thought, I'm never going to get through this, and I don't care what's on the other side. It's not true. And then I came up with this analogy. And I don't know if you've ever been to a really bad movie, and then you just sit there because you're so determined that if you sit through to the end, something will say that it's 2 hours later. I had a really bad movie in my day. And when I was reading Sermon on the Mount by Emmet Fox, and there's the Jesus and the Christ and the Beatitudes, I thought, no. But then I said, I'm going to finish this, and there better be something at the end of this meal that will be worthwhile. And it was, because once I got past the big chunks of that stuff, and then it opened up into these other things,
to the end, just plow through to the end, and you'd be surprised at what you open up. That's it.
Thanks, Jay. In the back and Brown.
Yeah, my name's Mike, and I'm calling.
Mike.
As kind of put it into decent phrasing. So, as Bill, Bob, and the other dozen or so folks that helped create these texts that we had, and different forms of thought that were going on, why is it that this particular piece of literature continues to be talked about? There were so many that were available to them that they did draw from, and not just from religious life. And there's a specific reason why we don't associate our organization with any other organization, whether it be religious, political, or so on and so forth. You know, we, and I have very clear, no qualms about anybody's personal spiritual account. And understand that, this has been a great book of discussion for many years. But I am concerned that, especially anyone who hasn't read these texts and what have you, or haven't been through the steps and things like that, is not be confused. So how do you separate, the idea of what you're obviously the phrasing that you're using is God in the context of Western thought up there. How do we convey this without? It's not the common through religion. It's definitely not. We're meant to deal with it a long time. How does this fit in alcohol phenomenon today? How do we place this into our spiritual repertoire today? With all the things that are available to us, rather than just taking it as rote in one particular way. What do we say about that?
What I tell people I sponsor is that you want to use conference-approved literature, namely the big book, and if you want to expand your journey, there are many different avenues to do so. And our basic text tells us that too. There are many useful books also. Let your priest, minister, or rabbi recommend a few. Just paraphrase it. We all know that they're not AA, that they're not conference approved. However, we don't have a monopoly on God. I actually wrote an article for the Grapevine some time ago, and it's called The Spiritual Kindergarten. Alcoholics Anonymous ultimately is a spiritual kindergarten. We get to learn the rudiments of whatever faith that we have here. But even Bill told us we should go on to expand, to grow in understanding and effectiveness. And this is just one avenue. It just happens to be one that was very popular and still continues to today. Yes.
Just to go a little deeper on that, there's a lot of all these people that are doing that won't take a step in 4 weeks by Chuck Stewart, not approved at all. New pair of glasses, not approved. There's stuff that's read all the time. I think there's controversy about people's upbringing within the Fox. And, there's even a part of literature that says there's a bar against all information, that is proof against all argument, and can leave a man in everlasting ignorance, and that's contempt prior to investigation. Because I already know what's going to happen before I try it. When facts show that people say this works in their life, this has changed their life, and we sit there and we say, ha, yeah, right. And half the room raised their hand that I read, that they read this, and we're sitting here that's a miracle. And I totally forgot what my question was. But
No, we're not done yet.
yeah. It was for the thing. It wasn't really a question. If we broke down the Sermon on the Mount, we robbed you of the experience of reading. It's an experience. We robbed you of the experience. And you want to steal that.
Thanks. Yes.
My name's Nick. I'm not
Nick.
Hey, I'll tell you, in the first part of the Sermon on the Mount, I come to AA with a lot of fixed ideas. I was raised in my family comes from very structured, organized religion. And I talk about these ideas about what Jesus Christ was, what organized religion is, based off of a certain perception of alcoholism. It was a huge eye-opener for me, and it really helped me put down my prejudice. Reading that first part of the book of what these principles are that are taught. I always thought of organized religions, temples and churches, and money and control. So I've always gone against those establishments. But that first part of the book really helped me set aside my prejudice of what needed to be taught. So I would highly encourage anybody to sit down and read it, because once again, my fixed ideas are what's really killing me and keep me sick. Being enlightened through these teachings, it changed me. So that's all I wanted.
Thank you. Yes.
With the 12 steps, who originally the Emmett Fox had any correlation with
Actually, there are two very separate ideas in organizations, and the ideas. I'm sorry? Was there any correlation or interaction between Emmet Fox and the Oxford groups, which there really was none? Yes.
I don't know where I heard it. I think a lot of meetings sober and drunk. I don't know where I heard it. There's 31, this might be off topic too. There's 31 chapters in the book of Proverbs in the Bible. I heard that, I don't know where I heard that the first 100 or first few, whatever, they would read the Proverbs for the day, like today is the 28th, so they would read the 28th chapter. And then talk about it. That's true.
I know that Emmett Fox covers the Proverbs in Around You with Emmet Fox, and he selects a couple of them in there. I don't know if they did that in early AA. They probably did. Yes.
As a sponsor, I think through the 12 steps but dealing specifically with spiritual communication, with friends, in relationships, etc. I use analogies, right? And I think it's important as long as I understand where it comes from in the big book compared to where it comes from in other literature. I think that works well in communicating a spiritual experience. The problem comes, I think there's a lot of people who are abrasive to the mixing of ideas and stuff. And it's important for me to communicate more spiritual experiences, in order to really live it. And I'm wondering how you have been able to work in your time. I'm sure you've come across a range of people who want to challenge you, which is good, actually. I think being challenged is not a bad thing. But I tend to sometimes want to close down in that situation, rather than being able to really express what I'm trying to express. So I'm wondering how you're able to learn to come to express those things in your spiritual experience in that sense.
What I do is I tell stories. And I don't attribute the ideas to any particular text or anything like that. Just like that story about, Columbus, belief in the untrue. And I do that over and over again without actually talking about what the particular literature is that it comes from. All that I know is it illustrates the spiritual idea sufficiently that people grasp it. And I'll do that in meetings over and over and over again. When you read if you get a chance to read The Spirituality of Imperfection, that's what it's about. It's storytelling to talk about spiritual truths. And it's the best way to convey an idea is to tell a story that people can connect with. And that's exactly what Bill does in the big book, too. Thank you. Yes, you have it.
Okay, I'm one of alcoholics. I come from one of Mexico, and this is so interesting because over there, we very read the literature of AA, right? And obviously this goes way beyond that level. And I'm seeing at your level, and I'm trying to be conscious at what level am I at in my inroad. I see people or look for people that obviously more years older than me and have read the book. Some Americans in my life also in Mexico that live there. I try to reach out, not reach out, but ask for the help. Then they know about the book, obviously. sober guy, 42 years sober. He knows about it. I guess that this would be a question, but it would be like a difference. And if there's any doubt on the question of how far should I go to found my serenity, you should go to Mexico. You should get into that culture and see the lack of interest in maybe growing spiritually. And when I see the difference in my country and the difference here in America, maybe it's the age difference. It's not maybe, at least I can feel myself. But, what I can say is that growing and getting to that point where I have those 7 days, not thinking negative stuff, something like that. But I don't know, just thank you for your sharing your knowledge and for your interest when you were an alcoholic and now before you still like you are still an alcoholic, I guess.
Recovered, but yes, an alcoholic.
But you continue your path, you continue the road, and thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, you.
Yeah, my suggestion is
What's your name?
Nils alcoholic.
Hi, Nils.
Hi, we have a study group in the Stockholm Swedish group where we study this book, and it's the best experience I've had. So it really gets you thinking about spirituality. And
Thank you, Nils. In the back.
I just want to comment on something that one thing that a lot of people come to AA and they don't realize is that when AA was founded, what did they have to work with? Mostly Midwest, Northeast United States, largely Christian based, and the programs found in India or somewhere else, there's a whole different set of controversial discussion and hopefully around the same type of food, which is clean path, which is towards the spiritual food, is the right one. And what I see is, sometimes this rigid resistance to integrate and learn about this information because it comes from a certain background. I myself don't like when somebody says Jesus is the only way to be. This is the whole thing. Yeah, I know deeply, but I don't want to hear it name. However, then you go to LA, you have the Dharma punk meetings, who can do philosophy and folks that still reach the same conclusion. And my question to you is, how do you elaborate on that? Sort of like separating from the fundamental, let's say, Christian concepts, get it more base. I think where Fox was trying to get to, but he was still working with the underpinnings of what he was brought up with, what he was taught. And you've got to start somewhere to end up somewhere. And I'm wondering, how do you articulate that or discuss that transition, that space of love and absolute forgiveness that Fox talks about? A lot of other philosophies talk about this part of it.
Well, I'd invite all of you to come to the Interaction Group in Manhattan. We meet on 95th Street between 5th and Madison. We have a big book step study at 6:30 at night on Wednesdays. And we talk about God freely there, but we don't talk about the specifics about our beliefs about God, but we talk about what the results have been in having those beliefs in our lives. So it's a room full of people who talk about what their demonstration is, and they talk about what they've overcome in their lives, but they don't say it's because of Jesus Christ, Son of God, or anything like that. They talk about their relationship with a higher power or God, and that's it. They don't say anything about their specific relationship with God, because it's a highly personal thing. And we do more harm than good in Alcoholics Anonymous by saying things such as, Jesus is the only way, or you really should be a Buddhist because that's the only way to stay sober, or whatever the case may be. And whatever anybody's personal choice is, Emmet Fox came up with the ultimate test, and that is, does it work? Regardless of what the belief is, does it work? And if you're a happy camper and it works, who's going to argue with that? Does it mean that everybody's got to follow your way? Absolutely not. Nobody has to. I liken it to going to Baskin Robbins. Everybody's there for ice cream, but not everybody's there for Rocky Road. And not everybody likes the flavor of Jim Kelly either. And that's okay. I try to let my demonstration speak about what I have found in AA. And if somebody wants to talk about it and ask me about it, I'm very happy to talk about it. But in meetings, I try to be as generic as possible because I might lose an opportunity to carry a beneficial message otherwise. That's a great point. Thank you so much for bringing it up. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and so I need to be really careful about how I carry the message about my higher power. And for me, I have pretty strong spiritual beliefs. I love outside reading, outside studies, totally love it. When I'm here, I'm interacting with people who are also members of Alcoholics Anonymous, are sharing a message. There's a really big difference between, this is my higher power, this is exactly blah, 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 versus someone coming and saying, so what's your higher power like? What have you studied? Are there any books you could guide me to that would be useful to you? And that's the difference between attraction and promotion. Like you said, I just lead by example. I let my actions demonstrate, how I'm living this program. And I'm fascinated by spiritual endeavors. I mean, literally, I can spend all day, my free time just reading books about all kinds of different things. And I think that it's really important that, this is a spiritual program. We can be any religion and faith, you can be anything here.
Right.
I love that. I love the freedom of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I love that we can come together in community. And I also love where we got this information from. Where did this big book come from? Like, just hearing about stuff like this. Well, there were little pieces from here. There were little pieces from here. And we're still unified. We're not claiming any of that. We're saying these are the tools and principles that have been part of how we seem to be and how we live freely. It's not, there doesn't have to be any self-belief. And seeing how awesome it is that Bill took that from here and this from here. How beautiful is that?
It's spectacular.
I just love it. I love that we are a unified group of people and we can have a discussion about this and have different beliefs and see the beauty of it and how powerful these principles are and that they lead to freedom. Period. I love it. I really do.
Thanks. The miracle started on a bleak November day when Emmet Thatcher sat across from Bill and told him, why don't you choose your own conception of God? That is what changed everything. Yes. Anthony.
I was just wanting to hear some more about your practical experiences specifically application for your alcoholism.
Oh, that's a mouthful. I could tell a story about. I could tell a little story about that, and it really doesn't encompass everything that you asked. It's a story about when I first came. I started working at Garden State Plaza for Westfield, and I wasn't happy about being there. And I was having, a difficult time working in that environment with people I really didn't want to work with. And until one day in meditation, I started to see that the reason why I was there was to be a demonstration of God's power in my life. That the work itself took on a different meaning that day. That I started to see that the work that I did only enabled me to carry a message. Now, none of those people know I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous. Nobody at work. Today, and face anything that comes down the pike without any fear, keeping a modicum of dignity throughout. And on occasion, somebody will come to me and ask me, well, how does that happen? 4 other people in that position burned out in 6 months, and yet you are able to do this. And, when it comes down to it, it goes back to what I read at the very beginning on page 95. This is it. And what it says there is that basically we're here to find a power greater than ourselves, that we have to change the people we bring to AA, and not just change the outsides, but the insides. And once I find a relationship with God that works, everything else is a piece of cake. Everything's a piece of cake. And so now today, my prayer is, place me at the place where I could be of maximum service to those about me. Not give me X, Y, and Z and cash and prizes. All that stuff comes, but only if I ask to be of service to others. So it really doesn't answer the question very well, but it does talk a lot about how I've gotten to that place. Yes.
All
right. Welcome.
I've been following AA for 10 years, so 17. And over the last 9 months, it's been the longest period of right I've ever yet. I always relapse for like 3 months, 6 months. Something that I realized a couple weeks ago, was like the message that I heard in Alcoholics Anonymous the first day I walked in hasn't changed, but my relationship to the message has, that and this is more taste going back to the type of person I've trained my mind to be is to resist everything and everyone. The steps, I didn't want to do the steps at first, I ended up listening to, after the detox was probably behavior stuff. I thought that was probably bullshit, even like the God thing, I didn't really I don't really know how I felt about that for a long time, But over over my, consistent relapses, trying different things, finally pulling my head out of my ass, listening to what the message was. I realized that it's really just the same message. Like we're saying, retrain the brain. Buddha talks about the monkey brain, training the monkey. Untrained monkey, training the monkey to do the right thing, and it'll do the right thing. It doesn't matter if you hear it from, Dharma monks, which is something I found very helpful in my life, or if you're reading on the Bible, retrain your brain to respond to everything in life differently. That's been my experience up to this point, and I believe that's one of the main reasons why I have to do that. Over the last 9 months, I know it's not a whole lot of time, but it's the most time I'm damn proud of it.
Excellent.
I'm a junkie shitbag who can't stop stealing shit from his mother. That's the type of shit I am. I'm not that kid. First, I look back in the mirror, it's not that person. It's awesome. It's pretty cool.
Thank you. Right in front of you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Meredith.
Hi, Meredith.
It's kind of ironic for me to sit down in an Emmett Fox panel because I picked up that book and I was extremely uncomfortable when it got on the detox, And then even more ironic, I just started secretarying this meeting that all spiritual content, provided we are open to all spiritual concepts, essentially limitless expansion, And
I kind of want some feedback, you know. Since picking that book up, it's gotten slowly better, especially since I'm attending this meeting where people are bringing in Emmett Fox and Tuesdays with Ori. It's kind of like, well, you know, it's a lot of different shit. It's a rock band. It'll be a comedian that makes fun of AA. It's a lot of different stuff. And it's really good for somebody like me who gets really uncomfortable when people say things that make me uncomfortable, what are your suggestions for moving past that, I picked this book up a couple of times, and I haven't been able to get through it. So, when Natalia and I want to, I've read it, I'm like, oh, introduction. And then when I got to the images, I was like, ooh, yeah. So,
Don't read it by yourself. That's probably the best thing I could possibly tell you. Don't read it by yourself. Find a couple of people who've actually read it before. Meet with them. Talk about it, because there you'll be able to talk about what you're concerned about. What are the stopping blocks that won't let you accept some of these ideas? The other thing is, reread chapter 4 in the big book, where it tells us to set aside our old ideas, our prejudices against religious terms, because that's the one thing that'll help us to open our minds up. And we're out of time, which is probably unusual for one of these things. I really do appreciate everybody coming out, and let me turn it back to our leader, who will take us out.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Sobercast is ad-free, and we'd like your help in order to keep it that way. So if you'd like to help us be self-supporting by pledging $1 or $2 a month, visit sobercast.com and look for the donate links. Thank you very much.